Hello, everybody. This is Ralph Martin, the founder of RJ Quality Consulting. And in this video, I want to talk about the ISO 17025 impartiality requirements. I'm going to explain those, and this is as it pertains to section 4.1 of the ISO IEC 17025 2017 standard. And as many of you know, I am a auditor for ISO 17025, so I'm very familiar with the standard and I'm familiar with what auditors are looking for when they audit your facility. And what I'd like to do in this video is also talk about, what type of documentation do you need in order to meet the requirements of section 4.1. And I really do try to put in section 4.2 as well, which is the confidentiality section. Oftentimes labs will combine their policy for both impartiality and confidentiality. So they do kind of go hand in hand. But I will be discussing that and really what the documentation would be necessary to meet the requirements of the standard, really from an auditor's perspective. Like, what is the auditor going to ask you for objective evidence to ensure that you're meeting the requirements of section 4.1 and 4.2 of the standard? So if you're watching this video on YouTube, in the description box, there's a link to my blog post called ISO 17025 Impartiality Requirements Explained. And you can read about all the details of impartiality, what it means, and all of that. I just wanted to kind of do an overview with this video to help you understand the standard. And oftentimes what I like to do when I'm talking about requirements of the standard is to actually go to the standard itself and go through it so that you get a better understanding of these general requirements. So what I'll do is go right to section 4.1. Let me close that out. I'm right here is my copy of the International Standard for general requirements for the competence of testing and calibration laboratories. Down in, first of all, impartiality is defined in the definition section of the standard. So we can look at this just to define it. Impartiality is the presence of objectivity. That is the definition of impartiality. The standard offers two notes. And notes are interpreted in the standard as requirements as well. So you are, you do have to meet the requirements of any notes that you see in the standard. So note one is objectivity, means that conflicts of interest do not exist or are resolved so as not to adversely influence subsequent activities of the laboratory. Note two is other terms that are useful in conveying the element of impartiality include freedom from conflict of interest, freedom from bias, lack of prejudice, neutrality, fairness, open-mindedness, even-handedness, detachment, and balance. So the laboratory is required to uphold impartiality requirements. So what we want to do is go right down to section 4.1 where we have the requirements for impartiality. It's a very short section. However, many laboratories get this wrong. I have written many nonconformances in the area of impartiality, mainly for the reason is what I'll see typically and what auditors really get tired of seeing. So if you're doing this, please don't do this. And that is, you have an impartiality policy thrown in your quality manual and you basically regurgitate the standard. And when the auditor asks, show me objective evidence that you're meeting this, and you get that blank stare like, what do you mean? So you really, when you're writing stuff in your quality manual, the idea is that you say what you do and then you do what you say. So as I was saying, don't regurgitate the standard and not do what you say. So ISO requirements are really say what you do what you say. And doing what you say usually entails some sort of objective evidence that you're doing what you say. So in section 4.1.1, this is a shall statement. So the laboratory activity shall be undertaken impartially and structured and managed so as to safeguard impartiality. Section 4.1.2, the laboratory management shall be committed to impartiality. And 4.1.3, the laboratory shall be responsible for the impartiality of its laboratory activities and shall not allow commercial, financial, or other pressures to compromise impartiality. Now, I want to stop here because, as I mentioned before, I want to explain to you what documentation would be necessary to meet the requirements of the standard. And basically what I'm kind of suggesting is that you break these documentation requirements into what I call three parts and to meet the requirements. So basically we're looking at three documents. And what I want to do is, the reason I stopped here is, in my mind, Section 4.1.1, 4.1.2, and 4.1.3 entail really one document. So what do I mean by that? So first of all, if you look at 4.1.2, the laboratory management shall be committed to impartiality. So just from a logical standpoint, what document do you think you need to convey that message that management shall be committed to something? What usually in a company that you work for, when we're talking about management commitment, what is that? What does that look like? Well, what that looks like is a policy, right? I mean, the company should have a policy that states its impartiality requirements to its employees. And the reason they have a policy is because they're committed to impartiality. So when you see something like, the laboratory management shall be committed to, or, something like that, that usually indicates that you need some sort of policy to ensure that happens, and that we have a statement that management is committed to impartiality. So section 4.1.1, 4.1.2, 4.1.3, we should have some sort of policy. So that's the first document that an auditor is probably going to want to see, a policy for impartiality. And if you don't know what to put into the policy, well, you kind of have the guidelines right here. Laboratory ABC undertakes impartiality, and its management is structured and managed so as to safeguard impartiality. That would be part of the policy. Our management at ABC Laboratories is committed to impartiality, and the laboratory is responsible for the impartiality of its activities, and we do not allow commercial, financial, or other pressures to compromise impartiality. Now, if this is a policy, right, then that means that everybody agrees to the policy. So what does typically management do to ensure that everybody is going to agree to this policy? Well, oftentimes what I see in laboratories is an employee handbook that states the impartiality policy, and everybody signs the last page of the employee handbook indicating that they agree to these things, right? There could be other things in your employee handbook that you're agreeing to, confidentiality requirements, things like that. You'll keep all information confidential. You won't discuss things that the company doesn't want you to discuss. And you usually, it's oftentimes not unrealistic to see these types of signatories in companies where the company will ask you to sign a employee handbook or something like that. So that's typically the document we're talking about that would be objective evidence to meet this requirement. Now let's go on further. So section 4.1.4, the laboratory shall, this is a shall statement, so that doesn't mean you can if you want to. It means you shall do it or you'll get a non-conformance. The laboratory shall identify risks to its impartiality on an ongoing basis. So what does that mean? It means the laboratory shall identify risks to its impartiality on an ongoing basis. So what that means is in a situation where you've identified, hey, there's a risk to impartiality here, you need to document that on an ongoing basis. So I could think of two areas where ongoing basis would would be, this would satisfy this. Number one, if the company gave a training on impartiality and they did that annually, that would be identifying risk to impartiality because we're doing the training. In the training, we're taught to identify risk to impartiality and we're doing it annually, meaning ongoing basis. So that's one way. Another common way, and this is the way that I would recommend that laboratories do, is that you discuss it during management review. So management review is conducted typically annually. Some labs do it quarterly. Some labs do 2 management reviews a year. But at bare minimum, you should do a management review at least once a year. In that management review, there is a section, a required input for management review to discuss risks. So this would be an area. So on your agenda for management review, you should have an area where you talk about risks. And the quality manager usually presents the documented risks to senior management to show senior management the risks that had been undertaken during since the last management review or last year or whatever period your management review is covering. And in the agenda, you might have something like ask everybody in the room if they've experienced any risk to impartiality throughout the year. Even if everybody was to say no, and you just documented that in the meeting minutes, that would be evidence that you tried or you attempted to identify risks to impartiality on an ongoing basis because you put that in the meeting minutes. Asked everybody if they had any issues. John said this, ... I notated in the management review meeting minutes. Or everybody said no. We asked everybody, hey, did you experience any risk to impartiality during the year? And everybody says, no, I really didn't. Everything seemed to be pretty good this year. And you notate that in the minutes. And then you could show that to an auditor. That would be the second document that I think would be good to show that. Another document would be, since you have to meet the requirements of section 8.5 of the standard. I'll get that into another video. But section 8.5 of the standard is the laboratory shall identify risks, right? So you probably have some sort of document where you document your risks. That could be risk register, a risk spreadsheet where you mitigated risks. And on that spreadsheet, you would identify risks to impartiality specifically. For example, we audit our purchasing department every year. And the expert in the purchasing area is the purchasing agent. However, if we have the purchasing agent auditing purchasing, that oftentimes could be showing bias. So we tend to, when it comes to that area, we tend to get the quality manager to audit purchasing, so to mitigate that potential risk to impartiality. That could be on a risk register, that's how you do it. So those are the 3 documents that I would want to see if I was auditing section 4.1 of the standard. I really hope this helps. And also it should add value because if you're a small company and there might be some impartiality issues between, say, the owner of the company and the customers. Maybe the owner of the company has some commercial or financial holding within the customer. That could be a risk to impartiality. So how do you mitigate that risk? You're aware that it's a risk. So what do you do to mitigate that risk to impartiality? Cannabis labs have issues sometimes where the owner of the company has some sort of financial tie to an investor of the lab and things like that. Is there a risk to impartiality somewhere there? And if there is, could you identify it, document it, and take action to mitigate those risks? If you're a cannabis lab and you're not dealing with impartiality, you're going to get a non-conformance. Auditors pick on cannabis labs in the area of impartiality. So because there are areas in that industry where there could perhaps be some risk to impartiality because typically in a cannabis lab, a lot of money is thrown at these labs, and they usually have backed by some investor of some sort. So you want to watch that. Auditors are aware of these issues, and there might be a state requirement that may have an impartiality issue with a 17025 requirement. Many states require that you are 17025 accredited as a cannabis lab, but then they have some of their requirements also. So you might want to look at, is there any impartiality issues here? So I just want to talk a little bit about confidentiality, because oftentimes companies will combine their impartiality policy with their confidentiality policy. And I just want to go to section 4.2.1. The laboratory shall be responsible through legally enforceable commitments for the management of all information obtained or created during the performance of laboratory activities. So basically, anytime you talk about legally enforceable commitments, that usually indicates a signature of some sort where it's a legal binding agreement. So an employee signs an agreement to keep things confidential, especially as it pertains to the customer. And typically a company will ask that employees sign this agreement, and usually that's done in an employee handbook. And oftentimes, just to not have so much documentation, oftentimes labs will combine their impartiality policy with their confidentiality policy and have employees sign that. And that's kind of where you want to go with that. One thing, though, I do want to cover, because I give a lot of nonconformances in the area of confidentiality, is section 4.2.4. Personnel, including any committee members, contractors, personnel of external bodies, or individuals acting on the laboratory's behalf, shall keep confidential all information obtained. So, if an employee signs an agreement, that's one thing. That is personnel. But what about personnel of external bodies? This means contractors that come on your site. Oftentimes, the documentation that meets this requirement would be something as simple as a sign-in sheet when somebody comes and visits your lab. You might have a little note at the bottom of the sign-in sheet. By signing this, you agree that you'll keep information confidential, and that's it. Then somebody signs in, puts the time that they entered the facility, and then maybe signs out when they leave. That would be something on the contractor personnel of external bodies, covering them, and your confidentiality agreement for your employees is covered by this employee handbook or confidentiality agreement being signed. So I hope this helps to understand this section 4.1 and 4.2 of the standard, and what the objective evidence would be, and documentation that you would want to provide to an auditor during your next audit. And if you ever need any help with anything related to ISO 17025, I am considered an expert in ISO 17025, and because I'm not a large consulting company, I can give you a very good price, and I can even create all the documents for you, carry you across the finish line, and I do guarantee that you'll get accredited if you're seeking accreditation, or if you would just like to pass your next audit with flying colors. I can certainly help you with that. Go ahead and somewhere on the bottom of this video, if you're looking at it from my website, you can book a free 45-minute consultation with me, and I'll be happy to do a gap analysis for free for you, and we can discuss what needs you might need that I can offer you, so that you can really understand the ISO IEC 17025 standard and anything that you might need my help with. So you guys make it a great day, and I thank you. Have an awesome one.